But I wanted to start with something, just an observation about politics and human relationships. Romantic relationships or interpersonal relationships on the one hand and political relationships on the other hand, and how they might relate to each other, or how, what are the parallels? Because a lot of us in 2008, when Barack Obama was running for president, basically fell in love with him. And a lot of people in the years since then have not only fallen out of love with him, but even gotten to the point of, like, the circular firing squad. Nothing he can do is right or good enough, that sort of thing. I think Chris Hedges just published a piece basically, bashing Bernie for joining the Democratic Party, for example. I mean, this is like the extreme example of it. So how does this happen? How do people fall in love, bond, and then on the backside, how do they break up? What is the cycle of relationships, and how does that apply to politics? Probably the woman who has done the best work on this is Diane Vaughan. She wrote a brilliant book called Uncoupling. And years ago, Louise used to coach couples. She used to be a relationship coach, and did a lot of work with this in people. And so I'm very familiar with it. So here's the process, okay, with individuals. When two people first start sparking, everything that they're looking for in the other person is always, how is that person just like me? Oh, she likes the same stuff I do. Oh, he has the same opinions I do. Oh, she, like that. They find all the areas of identicalness, and they continually amplify those areas of identicalness until there's a relationship, right? And at that point, that's really infatuation. It feels like love, and it can become love, and it's infatuation. And then the second stage, and again, this is like, Barack Obama. I during 2008, I was saying he's the national Rorschach test. And I don't want to make this all about Obama, because we got another election coming up, and Republicans go through this, and Democrats go through this, and this has to do with the base and everything else. But we were infatuated with him because we all saw in him what we wanted to see. Then the second stage of a relationship happens, and this is the getting to really know you, where the differences start becoming evident. Oh, you don't like that food? Yeah, but I like that food. Oh, you don't like to go out, for walks, and you'd rather sit on the couch, but I would rather go for, or whatever it may be. I mean, people start, and of course, obviously, most of those differences are much more substantial than that. But as the differences become visible, typically one of two things happens. Either the infatuation cools down and people just kind of part as friends, and hey, we had a nice time together for a while. Or they accept the differences in each other and either celebrate those differences, hey, I can learn from you and you can learn from me, or ignore those differences. Hey, there's this part of you that, I find problematic, but I can get past that. And that's when people are actually in love. That's a serious relationship. And the same thing in politics. Looking at President Obama and saying, I think he's crazy on trade. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to divorce him. Right? He's really good in a lot of other areas. I'm going to try, I'll either look over it, I'll look past it, I'll try to change it. Now, in politics, you can try to change things. In relationships, don't even try. This is a matter of acceptance or stepping away, because you can't change other people. You can only change yourself. Here's the irony, though, the amazing irony. When you change yourself, the people around you change. But I digress. I mean, this is the beginning of a long rant about relationships, and well, actually, there's a political analogy to that too. And I want to get to where Bernie fits into all of this, and I will in just a second, because as we change ourselves, as for example, the Democratic base, the party base, starts speaking up about the things that really concern us, then our partner in the relationship, the Democratic Party and its leadership, President Obama and others, they either change or they don't. I mean, this is Chuck Schumer's speech a couple of weeks ago. There was just this such a mind-boggling, and Chuck Schumer is like the inside guy's inside guy. And it was such a mind-bogglingly populist speech that I had to read it to you on the air. So anyhow, that happens. Sometimes when people can't handle the differences, they feel actually rejected, and they form the circular firing squad. They act like dumped lovers. They start trashing the other person. Usually, though, that doesn't happen, as infatuation just fades. So this is how people come together, and this is how love forms over time. Now, how do people break up? The breakup always starts with something called the cry unheard. This is Diane Vaughan's phrase from her book Uncoupling. And the cry unheard is where one partner in a relationship says, essentially, I don't feel loved anymore, or I'm not getting what I need out of this relationship. But they very rarely say it in such a clear and explicit way, and the other partner very often doesn't hear it. So they might just be complaining about, hey, you're making me go to the Bolshoi, and I hate the Bolshoi. And for them, it's a really big deal, but the other partner thinks, oh, it's just, small thing. It's a difference that we can overlook. And thus, the cry unheard, if the cry is not acknowledged, then it begins to fester. And distance starts to form between people. The initiator is actually in the process, the person who issued the cry, is actually in the process of decoupling. Whereas the partner is clueless, doesn't realize that this is happening. And as the initiator decouples, he or she actually begins to form amnesia, literally, can't remember the early days of the relationship about why did I fall in love in the first place? This is one of the first signs that uncoupling is real, that it's really happening. And again, this, back to politics. Hey, don't you remember why you liked Obama in the first place? That sort of thing. Then comes along another, this is Diane Vaughan's phrase, a guide may come along. Typically, it's a best friend. It can be a lover. It can be an affair, something like that. And then there's this process called going public, or it could be just to one person, but it's where the initiator says, I'm not happy in this relationship over here. And that's where I think many of us have been with the Democratic Party for the last couple of years, especially with this TPP stuff. And in fact, the initiator may even say, I feel dead inside. I don't remember the relationship. And in politics, this is why you have 20%, 25%, 12% in some communities, Democratic Party participation in the elections. Right? Hey, I'm not there anymore. So then the initiator, the person whose cry was unheard, springs this on the partner. The partner freaks out. This is the point at which then negotiations begin that may lead to a better relationship, but more typically lead to a breakup. And so who might that guide be for the Democratic Party? Could it be Bernie Sanders? Are we watching this arc of relationship being overlaid on the arc of politics? I had a little more to rant about this. I'll pick it up in 5 minutes.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And in fact, there's a way to recover the relationship, as it were. We'll talk about that too. Back to this rant about the parallels between romantic or even friendship relationships. By the way, friendships follow the same arc. Mentorships follow the same arc. This is sort of wired into our DNA. It's the way that we dance with each other, essentially, and figuring out, is this the right dance for me? Is this, all that kind of thing. And for recoupling, and in fact, this was an exercise, and I share this with you with her permission. Louise used to walk couples through this exercise when she did couples counseling back in the 90s. And it was asking the person who's the initiator, the person who is moving away from the relationship, because typically the left behind partner is in shock and either very angry or very frightened, is asking the initiator, can you remember why and how you first fell in love with the other person? And then asking that person to describe the scene the moment. Now, what that does, when you ask, what did it look like? What did it smell like? What did it taste like? What did you hear? What did you feel? When those questions are asked, that pretty much forces the unconscious mind to let go of that memory, to release it into the conscious mind. And so the initiator, if it's successful, now most initiators, if they're already way down the road and they just are, their mind is set on divorce or whatever, most initiators will then just say, no, I'm not going to go there. But many will remember that, and it provides them with an opportunity to break that cycle, to break the process, and basically kind of fall in love again. And to me, this is what Bernie Sanders is doing to the Democratic Party. He's saying to the Democratic Party, maybe as that guide, as Diane Vaughn's guide, although the analogy is imperfect, but I think it's damn close. And I would love to get your thoughts on this. Have you experienced in your life, first of all, these cycles that relationships go through? I think they're universal. And secondly, have you experienced them politically? And third, where do you think this is all going? And which brings us back to Bernie, because Bernie reminds us, at least those of us who call ourselves Democrats or feel an affiliation with the Democratic Party, why we fell in love with the Democratic Party in the first place. It's because of Social Security. It's because of Medicare. It's because of unemployment. It's because of a strong middle class. It's because of strong infrastructure. It's because, families could work because there was, function because there was enough money, with even a single wage earner could support a family. We had good manufacturing in this country, all these things. Literally the Democratic Party brought us. And I think over the last, basically since the Clinton presidency, when Bill Clinton declared, the end of welfare as we know it and began deconstructing along with Newt Gingrich, they were happy buddies in this, deconstructing parts of both the New Deal and the Great Society, that a lot of people essentially fell out of love with the Democratic Party. And then Barack Obama with his Hope and Change campaign, we came back. Oh, yeah, okay. But it was that Rorschach test. It was that infatuation thing. Now, the thing about Bernie is, to use the language of relationships for this metaphor, is that I'm not infatuated with Bernie at all. I'm in love with Bernie because I know him. I know the areas where I disagree with Bernie. I know the areas that I wish he would change. There's very few and very small. And I can, but I also, have a 20-year, close to 20-year history with Bernie. Louise and I moved to Vermont in 1996. Yeah, it's 19 years since the first time I met Bernie Sanders and shook his hand at a $5 for Bernie hot dog and beer thing that was down on the waterfront in Burlington, as I recall, that we just stumbled into because we were out taking a walk. Which raises a whole nother question, which I think is particularly fascinating, which is if a whole bunch of us fall in love with Bernie or have been in love with Bernie all along, because it's a deep and long-lasting and mature relationship now. It's not just an infatuation. And Bernie gets blown out by Hillary Clinton or some other candidate, and he drops out of the race. How many of us are going to become spurned lovers, as it were, the circular firing squad, the anger, versus how many of us are going to behave in a more mature is not quite the right word, but I lack a better one for it, pragmatic, perhaps, way, and say, well, okay, Bernie's not the candidate, but hey, any Democrat, Joe Manchin, any Democrat is going to be better than Scott Walker or Jeb Bush. It's just that simple, right? So we have this relationship with the Democratic Party. We have this relationship with, say, Hillary Clinton or whoever. And, it wasn't the person that we love, and we can love them when we're with them. What's the old Stephen Stills song? Love the one when you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. So, when we can't talk to Bernie on the radio and we can't listen, the 6 days out of 7 on the week, when we're not hanging out with Bernie, who we really love, can we also love Hillary Clinton or Martin O'Malley or whoever else? I mean, whoever else ultimately ends up being the nominee of the party. In a way, it's a question, and it is possible to have multiple relations at the same time, and it is possible even to love multiple people. We all do. I love many of my friends deeply. I love my wife. I love my kids. I mean, this is part of being a mature human being. So, can we have our relationship with Hillary and with Bernie? Now, there are a lot of people who are just so black and white that they'll just say, no, can't do that. It's all or nothing. Carl Jung called them judgers. Only this is the extreme of that. This isn't just a normal Jungian judger. This is like a very, very small slice of the population. It's kind of the ISIS part of the population.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
Or in American politics, I'd call it kind of the Chris Hedges faction. You are either perfect or you're out of my life. That kind of thing. Some subtleties here. Number one is it is possible to go through this and yet still maintain a relationship. So we can still be tied to the Democratic Party and not tied to the candidate, or we could be tied to a candidate. I mean, Bernie's not even a Democrat, although now he's stepped into the party in those places where he has to be on the ballot, and still have a commitment, to the other. It's almost like, again, the love in politics is an imperfect analogy. I'll acknowledge that right up front. In a 100% world, but in a 70 or 80% world, I think it's a damn good analogy. And so, number one. Number two, Shano made this point to me during the break. He said, could it be that a lot of people who initially or reflexively didn't like Hillary Clinton didn't like so because they felt that it was a prearranged marriage being forced on them? Which raises a really interesting question, because prearranged marriages in many parts of the world actually have a higher rate of long-term success than do falling in love marriages, which is a whole other topic that we've done shows on. And I didn't even believe until I read the books and saw the stats on it. And then finally, the big challenge in a relationship that is in which one of the couples is uncoupling. And by the way, the uncoupling doesn't have to be from the entire relationship. It can be from just one dimension of the relationship. In talking in relationships, people could uncouple, say, for example, physically or sexually, and still be coupled as friends or as partners or whatever. Or people can uncouple as friends. They start, but still be romantic. Well, I'm pushing the metaphor to the boundaries here. I'll stop at that point. But my point about the amnesia is that in an uncoupling relationship, the amnesia about whatever part of the relationship that's falling apart becomes very, very serious. I mean, it's like people literally can't remember the good times. And is Bernie the spark that has caused us to remember that the Democratic Party brought us and the Republican Party opposed Social Security, Medicare, the Peace Corps, unemployment insurance, civil rights, student grant and loan programs, safety laws, occupational safety laws, environmental laws, prevailing wage laws, the right to collective bargaining, paid medical insurance, paid vacations, pensions, workers' compensation, the Marshall Plan, flood disaster insurance, school lunch programs, public schools for that matter, women's rights, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the minimum wage, child labor laws, the 40-hour work week, the weekends. Democrats brought us weekends. USDA programs, FHA, Farmer Home Administration. This is back when the banks refused to make rural loans because they didn't want the bother. Flood control, rural water districts, rural electricity. I mean, all this stuff. Could it be that Bernie is breaking that amnesia? And is there something like that happening over on the right, too? That's a very interesting one. Or is it that what's going on the right that, Well, let's Quentin in Palestine, Texas. You had some thoughts on this, and you wanted to relate it to the Republican Party and the Tea Party. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir. It appears to be, we had a case study there that during the 2008 election campaign, before Obama was even elected, under George Bush's administration, the first Tea Party rallies were held, and they were rallying against the bailouts to the banks.
Right.
But their silent scream had previously occurred. They were upset over the deficit spending on the war and the war in and of itself.
So there was a cry unheard within the Republican Party that turned into the Tea Party. That turned into the spurned lovers, as it were.
And then they recoupled, because the Republican Party reminded the Tea Party that they both have this common connection of, immigrants, minorities, liberals, communists. We hate them together, so we get back together.
Right.
They've managed to succeed in that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right,
doing
Quentin.
the same thing now with her populism.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
To reconnect.
So then my so my metaphor is making sense. That's fascinating. Thank you very much, Quentin. Great to hear from you.